Hey guys, tonight we are diving into the harsh reality of the Wild West. Imagine the sun bearing down on you like a relentless, fiery hammer, dust swirling around in thick clouds, making it hard to see or breathe. You're parched, your throat dry like sandpaper, and there's no shade in sight. The land stretches out endlessly, barren and unforgiving, and you realize this world doesn't care if you're tough. It's a place where even the strongest can crumble under the weight of its brutality. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I love to hear where you're tuning in from, so post your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious to know how far this story travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's easy to romanticize the Wild West with its gunslingers and saloons, but let's get real for a moment. If you found yourself in this time and place, you probably wouldn't survive a single day. You might think you're tough enough to handle it, but from the moment you step foot in the dust, you're facing challenges you can't even begin to imagine. You think the rugged cowboy lifestyle is a dream come true. Well, here's the catch. The Wild West was a brutal place, designed to grind even the strongest down to nothing. Let's start with one of the biggest killers of them all, the heat and dust. The moment you step outside, you'll feel the sun bearing down on you like a hot iron. It's relentless, and there's no escaping it. No nice shaded tree to take refuge under, just the endless expanse of barren desert, and you trying to figure out how to stay alive. You could swear the earth is radiating heat, making the air thick and suffocating. You thought that sunburn you got on your last beach vacation was bad. Try spending an entire day without any sunscreen, walking through a desert where the temperature soars to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And let's not forget the wind, the constant, punishing gusts of dust sweeping through the air. You'll feel every bit of dirt and grit on your face, your eyes burning as they struggle to stay open. You might try covering your mouth and nose with a scarf, but the dust finds a way in, choking you with every breath. The dehydration sets in fast, your body sweating buckets but unable to retain any water, and that's just the beginning. No matter how much you try to protect yourself, the environment doesn't care. By mid-afternoon, you're already struggling to keep your footing in the hot sand, your energy drained, your body feeling like it's slowly shutting down from the heat. And when the sun finally sets, you're not out of danger yet. Oh no, the temperatures plummet, dropping to freezing levels. You'll be shivering in your boots, your body caught in a fight between the heat stroke from the day and the frostbite threat of the night. Historians still argue whether the constant exposure to these extreme conditions drove many to the edge of madness, or whether it was the isolation and constant danger that wore them down. Either way, you'd be just one more casualty in a world that didn't care about survival. So, imagine it. You're fighting against the elements, your body crying out for water and rest, but this is the Wild West. And if you think that's bad, just wait until you realize what's next. One minute, the sun's hammering down on you, and the next, the sky can turn as dark as midnight. Out of nowhere, a storm will roll in, and you're stuck in a torrential downpour in the middle of nowhere. But it doesn't stop there. These storms aren't like the ones back home where you can just hide inside and wait it out. No, these storms come with fury. Imagine the sound of the wind howling, sand and rain slamming against your face like needles. Visibility drops to nearly nothing, and the cold sets in immediately, almost like it's mocking the sunburn you got earlier. And then the floods. There, now that you're already struggling to keep your balance against the heat and dust. Let's talk about something that's going to make this survival thing even harder. The unpredictable weather. You might be thinking, it's hot, but at least it's consistent, right? Wrong. The Wild West isn't kind enough to give you even that. There's no such thing as a gentle rainstorm here. The ground is so dry and cracked that when the water does finally fall, it just doesn't soak in. Instead, it runs like a river, cutting through anything in its path. You'll find yourself scrambling, trying to avoid being swept away by a flash flood. And even if you do manage to survive the storm, the aftermath is even worse. The wild terrain that made it so hard to travel in the first place is now made worse with deep mud that makes walking a nightmare. Every step is a struggle, and getting stuck in the mud can be a death sentence. Even worse, if you're lucky enough to find shelter, it's not much better. There's a good chance it won't hold up against the powerful gusts or torrential rains. Those walls might not be strong enough to keep the elements out. You're left exposed, stuck out in the open, and trying to find your way through the storm with little more than the faintest glimmers of hope. Historians still argue whether the weather itself was one of the greatest enemies of the Wild West settlers. Some say it was the unyielding land and terrain that crushed spirits, while others believe that the unpredictable storms and extreme cold killed more people than outlaws ever did. Whatever the case, you'd have to be incredibly lucky or incredibly foolish to think you could handle this without a plan. So, while you're already doing your best to survive the heat, the dust, and the random weather systems that can pop up out of nowhere, let's throw in another challenge: finding clean, drinkable water. You'd think it would be easy to find, right? After all, this is the Wild West, and surely there are rivers and streams somewhere. But guess what? Most of the time, there aren't. You'll have to make do with what you can find, but fresh water is a rare luxury here. The rivers that do exist aren't exactly clean. They're often contaminated with all kinds of bacteria. And forget about finding bottled water. The only water you'll be drinking is whatever you can find in the landscape, and it's probably going to make you sick. You might try to find a well, but guess what? Most of them are either dried up or poisoned by people who were too desperate to care. And let's not forget about the challenge of carrying water. Imagine carrying a heavy canteen with you, constantly worried about whether you're drinking enough to stay alive. But what if you run out? It's not like you can just hop in a car and head to the nearest store. No, you're stuck out there with nothing but the sparse vegetation and the constant reminder that you're just a small, vulnerable speck in the middle of a vast and unforgiving land. So, while you're struggling with the heat, battling the unpredictable weather, and praying for even a drop of fresh water, let's move on to something that's going to make your survival chances even slimmer: food. You might think the Wild West is a land of endless opportunity, but when it comes to food, you're about to learn how little there actually is. You've probably heard the stories of cowboys cooking beans over a campfire, right? Well, that might be your daily reality if you're lucky enough to find them. But food isn't going to magically appear out of thin air. For the most part, you'll be stuck hunting for whatever animals you can find. And let me tell you, it's not as easy as it sounds. Wild game can be elusive, and it's not like you can just head out for a quick trip to the local grocery store if you don't get lucky. Even if you manage to catch something, your troubles aren't over. You're left with the constant risk of spoilage. You don't have refrigerators or proper preservation methods. You either eat it right away or you risk it going bad, especially if you don't know how to properly skin and clean it. And if you end up with something you can't eat right away, you'd better pray you're near a reliable water source to wash and cook it. Otherwise, you're looking at an even worse scenario: food poisoning. But the food you can find is often scarce, and survival becomes a matter of rationing whatever you can get your hands on. For the settlers, this was a real problem. You might be able to scrape by with a few beans, some dried meat, or maybe even some plants you forage, but it's not enough to sustain you for long. Historians still argue whether food scarcity was the most important factor in early settler deaths. Was it the lack of proper hunting knowledge, or was it simply the land's unwillingness to provide for those who tried to tame it? Either way, you'd quickly learn that hunting and gathering were a dangerous gamble, and one that often didn't pay off. The worst part, you could spend days, maybe even weeks, without a solid meal. And after a few days of barely eating, you'd feel the toll. Your body would start to slow down. You'd be weaker, hungrier, and more desperate. And in the Wild West, desperation gets people killed. The simple act of trying to feed yourself could be a game of life or death. On top of all this, you've got to deal with the wildlife that calls the Wild West home. You probably think you're tough enough to face off against the animals out there, but you've never encountered the true dangers of the wild, from rattlesnakes to coyotes to massive aggressive bears. You're surrounded by creatures that could tear you apart in seconds. And don't even get me started on the insects. Mosquitoes, flies, and ticks are just the beginning. You'll be covered in bites, itching day and night, and that's assuming you're lucky enough to avoid something that might actually be deadly. The real danger, though, comes from the predators. Imagine walking through the woods, minding your business, when you hear the unmistakable sound of a bear's growl in the distance, or worse, a mountain lion's scream as it watches you from a shadowed tree. The Wild West wasn't just a place where you had to survive the elements. It was a place where everything around you wanted to eat you, and with no firearms, no backup, and no way to get help, your chances of surviving a wildlife encounter would be slim at best. Historians still argue whether the human toll from wildlife encounters was overstated, with some claiming that the animals were simply another obstacle to overcome, while others point to it as a constant threat that kept settlers on edge. Either way, the reality of living in a land where every rustle in the bushes could be a deadly predator was enough to break many. So, now that you're battling the elements, trying to find food, and facing the constant threat of wildlife, let's talk about something even scarier: the outlaws. The Wild West was notorious for its lawlessness, and no matter how tough you think you are, you would have to face down the criminals that ran rampant in these towns. Now, imagine this. You've managed to survive the harsh weather, you've hunted down a meal, or at least managed to avoid dying of hunger, and you're finally making your way through one of the many towns that dot the landscape. But this isn't just any town. No, you found yourself in the middle of an outlaw's paradise. The Wild West wasn't known for its law-abiding citizens. It was famous for its lawlessness, and that's where the true danger lies. Outlaws ruled these towns with an iron fist, and they weren't shy about it. Forget about walking into a store to buy a few supplies or sitting down for a quiet drink. No, you'd be lucky if you made it to the bar without someone challenging you to a duel. Everyone around you could be armed, and you might never even know it until it's too late. The tension in the air would be thick enough to cut with a knife, and you'd be constantly on edge, unsure whether the guy sitting next to you at the poker table was going to pull a gun or offer you a handshake. You might try to go into a saloon to get some rest, but it's not going to be the safe, carefree break you're hoping for. The place is packed with rough, untrustworthy characters, drifters, thieves, and gunslingers, and these guys don't need a reason to start a fight. They might be looking for trouble, or worse yet, they might be looking for someone to blame for their own bad luck. If you make the wrong move, you could find yourself in the middle of a deadly confrontation with no one to back you up. And let's not forget about the infamous gunfights. If you've ever seen a Wild West movie, you've seen how quickly a simple disagreement can escalate into an all-out duel. But here's the thing, those gunfights were real, and they didn't play out like the ones in Hollywood. You might think you're fast enough to draw and shoot, but you're not just competing against one person. No, you're competing against a whole culture of people who have practiced their aim for years. These are the guys who spend every waking moment perfecting their draw, learning to shoot faster and more accurately than anyone else. And the worst part, you wouldn't even see it coming. 1 second, you're standing there, trying to figure out how to survive, and the next, you're flat on your back, staring at the sky. Historians still argue whether gunfights were as frequent and deadly as we've been led to believe. Some say that while duels did occur, they were more often exaggerated for the sake of storytelling. Others claim that the sheer lawlessness of the time made violence a regular part of life. Regardless, the fact remains, you're in a place where your life could be taken at any moment, and not for any particular reason other than bad luck. You might think you can talk your way out of it, but in the Wild West, words often aren't enough. Now, imagine that even after surviving the elements, the wildlife, and the outlaws, you have to face another enemy, one that you can't see, hear, or fight off. It's the constant presence of disease. It's easy to forget that the Wild West wasn't just a place of gunfights and rugged adventure. It was also a place where disease could wipe out entire towns without anyone being able to stop